Welcome back. The news has been dominated by Roy Moore and now Al Franken, but the state capitol in Tallahassee has been described as a toxic culture of sexual harassment. Clearwater State Senator Jack Latvala, a Republican candidate for governor, is being accused of groping 6 women. Jeff Clemens, the incoming Senate Democratic leader, just resigned after revelations about an affair with a lobbyist. People do things in Tallahassee that they would never do at the Rotary Club back home, says former state senator Don Gates. And our 2 guests tonight know firsthand about it. Former state representatives Keith Fitzgerald, who teaches political science at New College, and Shirley Brown, who is now a member of the Sarasota County School Board. Let me quote the first sentence in a recent article by the Miami Herald. For decades, sex has been a tool and a toy for the politically powerful in the male-dominated world of politics in Florida's capital. Now it is a weapon. True?
I think so. I mean, I know lobbyists talked about having closers at the end of session. If they needed something passed, they would send a woman in. Sometimes, I would imagine, if they sent female lobbyists in, they might send male lobbyists in too, to close the deal, to get the legislators' attention to be able to file something.
Rumor, or did you ever see that firsthand?
I never saw that firsthand, but I know it happened. I mean, and I know the lobbyist who brought that up.
Keith,
yes.
Did you ever see stuff like that firsthand?
That kind of thing, absolutely I did. And at the last couple of weeks of session, lobbyists who you had been dealing with entire session would suddenly come in and have a lovely young 22-year-old. And when it first happened to me, I looked at him like, are you really pulling this? Do you think this is going to work? But the answer is, when you talk to him, is, yeah, it works for a lot of people.
You're basically saying that there are lobbyists up there who are prostitutes.
Well, I'm not saying that they brought her for sexual favors, but they brought her to keep my attention on whatever their issue was. So it's a gradation. I don't think they're actually, I think it goes on that they actually do, in some cases, offer people up. There's a contest at the end of the session called the Miss Rotunda contest, where the lobbyists and other people up there rate the young women on the basis of their reputation for getting around, let's say. Again, that just sort of blew me away. I mean, it's just not the world I came from in my workplace.
You know, the question is, why are we only hearing about this now? You know, we're hearing about what's going on with Roy Moore and Al Franken. Certainly, this was a central theme in the presidential campaign, but basically the trading for sex, for votes. I mean, if this has been going on for years, what is taking it so long?
It used to be the way things were back in the 70s and the 80s and even into the 90s. It was, you know, remember how we used to be able to smoke cigarettes on an airplane? And, you know, people used to just drink and then go out and drive. I mean, we now know those things are not acceptable. And I think the Harvey Weinstein thing brought it to the forefront, that those things are not acceptable
But even
anymore.
Before the Weinstein thing broke out into the news, we heard that someone hired a private investigator to go up there and find out what people were doing, and purportedly that's why the allegations against Senator Latvala, you know, came to the surface, and Senator Clemens. So the question is, what is yet to come?
Well, that kind of bothers me, that they are, you know, putting cameras in hallways, you know, where people live in Tallahassee to get the dirt on each other. I mean, I think when they're going that far for politics, you know, when they're getting to people's personal lives, I think they're going a little far on that.
You know, one thing I would say about this is that the professions that you're seeing these scandals in are all professions that are high profile, high publicity professions. I think if you started poking your nose in a lot of businesses and a lot of other ways of life, you'd see very similar things. And part of what's changing is women are now getting more positions of authority, they have better networks, and they're just standing up and saying they won't take it anymore.
We are just getting started. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back. We have been deluged by the continuous coverage of Roy Moore and the growing number of women accusing the Alabama Republican trying to date them. in some cases assaulting them while they were teenagers. And now Al Franken, accused today of sexually harassing a woman before he was in the U.S. Senate during a USO tour of the Middle East. And joining us for more is former state representatives Keith Fitzgerald, who teaches political science at New College, and Shirley Brown, who is now a member of the Sarasota County School Board. And Shirley, I want to start with you because you said during our break the number of people that you served with, who you were elected alongside with, the number of them who eventually were doing this really kind of remains incredible.
Yeah, and I didn't personally get involved, but I know, one of them married a secretary or an aide, another one married a lobbyist, another one had definite reports of fondling the young girls up there. It was happening, but it was better than it used to be, is what I heard.
Still, even with the cases of Roy Moore, you hear those saying, what he did all those years ago, and obviously the behavior didn't extend to, after he got married. If he apologized and he asked God for forgiveness, then you should let him go. Hold on.
Or a 14-year-old, you don't get an apology.
All right, but we have heard that coming out of Alabama, and now you have the case of Al Franken. This was before he was in the U.S. Senate, you could debate about whether it was the same thing as Roy Moore, but still it is what it is. And ironically, Al Franken talked about the issue of sexual harassment right after the Harvey Weinstein case made the news. Here's what he had to say.
Last question. What do you make of the Harvey Weinstein scandal? It's been an interesting time in entertainment.
It's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing. And unfortunately, sexual harassment happens in every profession. And I think that we need to do something legislatively to make it easier for women to not only go to court, but so that this isn't secret.
How ironic. A guy who some talked about as possibly a candidate for president, something will be done legislatively because he's about to face a Senate ethics investigation, Keith.
Well, he actually asked for it himself. And listen, I don't think you can defend one side and criticize the other. You have to defend the behavior. I think this is a gender issue. It's about how men treat women. It's not about Democrats and Republicans and conservatives and liberals. It's about how men treat women. And you can't excuse it or minimize it just because somebody is on your team.
Now, you mentioned in Justice Peace that this is a nonpartisan issue, that you saw, both of you, Republicans and Democrats in Tallahassee behaving badly. Of course, this is a difficult issue for the president to talk about because during the presidential campaign, he was accused of inappropriate behavior by a number of women. Today, the White House press secretary was asked about this, and this is what she had to say.
The president believes that these allegations are very troubling and should be taken seriously, and he thinks that the people of Alabama should make the decision on who their next senator should be. The president said in his statement earlier this week that if the allegations are true, then that Roy Moore should step aside. He still firmly believes that.
Having said that, Sanders also said that the president knows better than most about the dangers of allegations that are not true. So this is a difficult thing for whether you're the president or a senator or a wannabe senator to deal with issues that happened years ago. But when a number of women come along with similar stories, this is something that people have to deal with.
Well, and it's not just, in the legislative areas. It happens in business every day.
We're doing a show on that next week. Okay. We're talking about
but
government today.
that happens too, and they've just got to understand it. It's not the way it used to be, and we even passed a law when I was in the legislature to say that a female prisoner, didn't have to say no or fight if the guard came in and wanted sex. She had to give it to him. It was rape. So it's other areas too.
I do want to say something about the president's allegations, though. There's a very, very excellent young reporter in the campaign who was hugged and kissed by the presidential candidate. She felt like she could not report on it because people would say, well, maybe as a woman you're not tough enough to carry this beat. And she didn't even carry. So as the campaign went on, it came out there were other allegations. You might look back and say, wow, if she had reported that at that time, those other allegations would look more credible, because this happened during the campaign.
Right, but still, during the campaign, you had a number of allegations by a number of different women. You had the incredible video of the president's comments, to Billy Bush. But voters heard that. They had their opportunity to vote on it or not, and they still elected President Trump.
Not the majority of the voters.
But enough of them to win the election. So there is that. The other question that I have to ask you is, I see that there is an attempt in Tallahassee to change the rules in terms of reporting sexual harassment. We're going to see where that goes. But in the United States Congress, there have been stories this week about what somebody has to go through to report allegation of sexual harassment against a lawmaker, and it seems, when was this ever okay?
You know, the rules in Congress are preposterous. They're absurd. One of the things that a person has to do, say a young woman or a young man is mistreated and they want to report it, they have to sign a disclaimer saying that they will not disclose the details of this to anyone, including a therapist. And this is what they have to do to get relief. And that's just absurd. So it's not, it shows that these problems are not just individual, they're institutional. They're not serious about stopping this.
So the question is whether, given our history in terms of the last year, in terms of what happened during the presidential campaign or what's going on with Roy Moore or Al Franken or in Tallahassee right now, you know, they often say that the best disinfectant is sunlight. Is this a problem that will be stopped in its tracks now because we as a society will have none of it, most especially with our elected leaders?
Well, I don't think it'll stop in its tracks, just like, you know, everybody, you know, hasn't stopped smoking on planes. Some still sneak in the bathroom. I mean, there'll be some that'll still happen, but I would think that as we're raising our young sons now, they'll have a better understanding of what is and is not acceptable. You know, but we've got young girls out there, too. I've seen aides up in Tallahassee trying to keep a scorecard of how many people they had sex with too. I mean, and that's, I think, just as wrong, because they could turn around and use that against these men. And you know, I think Monica Lewinsky had to bring something up, but that was another one.
Well,
I mean, trying to get those notches on your boat.
The Bill Clinton era. And Democrats came under intense criticism, including feminists, for standing by Clinton after what happened in the Lewinsky scandal and everything else that came out. I would imagine Democrats have a lot of explaining to do also in that regard.
Well, and I'll tell you, I was one of the rare Democrat who thought the president should resign. And the reason I thought that is that I've been teaching young women ages 18 to 22 for my whole career, and I know what a 22-year-old is like. And the older man is the responsible party in that. So I didn't give him a pass then, and I don't give him a pass now.
Exactly. And I think what we need to do is make sure that these men in Tallahassee and Washington know that these young girls are around, and maybe they are flattered by him, and maybe they would like to have, you know, that relationship. I know my mother said, you know, learn to type, be a secretary so you can marry the boss. No, you don't do that. That is not your way to the top, is through the bedroom. You've got to say no, and the young girls who may be misinformed on what they should do, the men have to stand up and say no. Okay. This is not right.
We will be back in a minute, so stay with us. We're talking about sexual harassment from Tallahassee to Washington, and these are final thoughts. I know what you're going to say here, but you know, whether it's in Tallahassee or in Washington, there's already talk about mandatory sexual harassment training for senators, congressmen, and in the House here in Tallahassee. Shirley, what do you think the answer is?
Well, I think we've got to continue this push to say no, and you know, even on the television. I mean, Saturday Night Live the other night, they had a lot of things that, to me, in their skits were sexual harassment. They've got to stop portraying it as good, as funny. And the men and even the women out there have got to understand that there's boundaries.
You know,
and stay to them.
Keith, I mean, this started with the Harvey Weinstein situation, Kevin Spacey. It's exploding throughout the entertainment industry. Now it's into our political world. One thing does have things to do with the other. As you said, it's in our workplace. But is the answer here stop normalizing this kind of behavior?
Yeah, and I will steal Shirley's idea. She said at the break, and I think she's 100% right. We need more women in positions of power. If half the legislators were women, this stuff wouldn't go on that much. If half the movie producers were women, this wouldn't go on that much. So as women become more powerful and have more responsible positions, this stuff is going to stop. And I think that's an important thing we all have to be supportive of.
You know, we reported that somebody hired a private investigator up in Tallahassee, and you believe that's really not the thing to do, but does that have the effect of putting legislators on notice that someone is watching what you're doing up there?
Yeah, and in that respect, it's a good thing, although it also opens up, you know, the possibilities that people will be falsely accused, which I don't think is a big problem, so don't get me wrong. But, you know, you don't want this to be done surreptitiously, and you don't want it to be done through snooping. You want it to be done because people recognize what the right thing to do is, and they do it.
Sure.
But they didn't put those cameras up there to make sure that these women were protected. They put those cameras up there to be able to attack these legislators politically,
Right.
to end their careers. That's a different issue,
Right.
I think.
So is Tallahassee any less toxic from this point of view than it was?
Well, hopefully they'll be cleaning up their act on some things, but you know, it sometimes seems the ones who wave the flag the highest are hiding the most behind it.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. But before we go, we want to share with you some thoughts about what some of you had to say about our show on mass shootings. 2 mass shootings, 84 people dead, nearly 600 injured, 35 days apart. Just the latest massacres in an unending cycle of horror, grief, recriminations, and utter frustration at our inability to do anything to stop it. Alice says, better background checks, better mental health care, of course, ban bump stocks, prayer. Okay. But then there's Harley, who says, when the Twin Towers were destroyed and so many people lost their lives due to radicals, why wasn't plane travel banned? Because, Harley, we did do something about it. We declared war. We tracked down every terrorist we could find and we put an end to them. We continue to run them down. And while we haven't prevented every single attack on the homeland, we haven't had another one as deadly as 9/11, have we? And then there's John, who says, quit dividing the country. Okay, John, by talking about it, let me get this straight. 26 people die while they were praying in the church a month after 58 people died enjoying a country music concert. We bring Second Amendment and gun control supporters together to look for some answers, and you say quit dividing the country because we're talking about it? If you're wondering, folks, why we have so far failed as a nation to find ways to make these massacres happen at least less often, there you go. If you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And a reminder, you can get all the latest local and national news on your smartphone app. But if you are an Apple iOS user and have the old version of our app, it will go away at the end of the month. iPhone users, you could find the new app by searching My Suncoast in the App Store. The app will be updated automatically for Android users. And we would like to thank both our guests for being here tonight, former state representatives Keith Fitzgerald, who teaches political science at New College, and Shirley Brown, who is now a member of the Sarasota County School Board.